How's everyone doing today? Excellent, excellent. It's a real pleasure to be here. And I have to admit, I've given many talks in many different parts of the world, but not once did I manage to go down a set of stairs with some smoke behind me. So that was incredibly good fun, I have to admit, to begin with. I was actually contemplating whether I do a little catwalk, but then I realized I neither have the hair nor the attire for that. So thankfully I decided against it. But I'm here today to talk to you about virtual reality. My job role specifically at PwC is I'm involved fully in virtual reality and augmented reality, talking to clients about the business value of the technology, how they can gather return on investment, and we're also developing projects internally in the firm as well. I won't go into them during this talk, but if you're interested in hearing about them, and there's one which is particularly exciting, just let me know at the Q&A. And feel free to take down my details if you'd like to have a chat later on. This talk specifically, I hope, is going to cover a unique angle around the virtual reality space. So I'm going to talk about VR, not AR. There may be one or two segments on AR, but it'll be mainly about virtual reality. And I'm going to start from a slightly different angle of talking about storytelling, immersion, our desire for experiences, and how this is driving greater adoption for virtual reality in the future, and why it will become a significant technology for all of us, whether it's in business or in our personal lives. So to begin with, a story about storytelling itself. Now, storytelling has been a human activity which has taken place throughout the ages. Ever since man and woman first stepped foot on this earth, we've been telling stories to each other in many different ways. We started off with cave drawings, and this is a picture of the Lacour caves in the Pyrenees in South France. They were drawn in 13,000 BC, and they told stories of many rituals, of hunting, and so on, of what we got involved with back in those days. We eventually moved on to stone writing, a form of book in a way. This is the Epic of Gilgamesh, which took place in 2000 BC, about a king who was pursuing greater wisdom. Then we moved on to talking about fables, and fables are a type of story usually with some sort of moral to them or lesson. Aesop's fables, 600 BC, they were told simply through word of mouth for many years. And you understand the theme. We've had printed books, Alice in Wonderland back in 1865, paintings, Starry Sky, Starry Night, 1889, and of course, some quite famous films as well. Any Star Wars fans in the house? A few. Star Trek, maybe? Oh, it's going to be a little bit of a battle after lunch, I think. Theatre, The Phantom of the Opera, 1986, another form of storytelling. And then even video games lately is an art form in itself that tells a story. Skyrim was quite old, but it holds a special place in my heart, which is why I include it up here on stage. So, we've seen that storytelling can take many different forms. First is visual, the cave drawings, the paintings. Secondly, written books, written stone tablets, words on paper that we can read. Thirdly, audio-based, music. Now, depending on what music you listen to, it could be a good story or a bad story, but it's a story nonetheless. And finally, spoken, actually talking about things that are happening, that are going on, that happened in the past and are happening in the future. And these can be viewed through different lenses. The first row in terms of what you can see, the second row in terms of what you can hear. And then the first column, more abstract, the second column on the right, more explicit, talking exactly about what these stories are about. Now, most stories are not one or the other, but they're actually a hybrid, a mix of all these different types. And you can see them here. Even presentations like this, in a way, are a form of storytelling. I'm trying to get a message across to you. So we've been telling stories for a very, very long time now. And the objective of storytelling, whether it's in our personal lives or in business, is to entertain, to provide information, to make you feel something, whether that's anger, happiness, acceptance even, persuasiveness. Now let's talk about immersion and our continuing quest to increase our immersion in the world and increase the amount of experiences that we want to have. A poll was done back in 2014, it was the Harris poll. It targeted millennials, and it talked about what they wanted from life and how that differed from other different generations. In the report, a direct quote, "For millennials, real value is derived from experiencing, not possessing." So this is a generation that values these new experiences, being involved in different places and different events. Now, in this particular report, they talked a lot about live events, concerts, and the like. But there are also other types of experiences as well. The cinema itself is an experience. It's a fairly immersive experience, and we'll come on to that in a second. Amusement parks, supercar test rides, even immersive theater, which is becoming more famous these days, is becoming a greater and greater part of our society. Now, the interesting thing is that it shows a desire to take part in new experiences. Particularly when I talk about cinema, I'm interested in it because it shows a certain path that humanity has taken. We went from, I'm talking about screens now. We went from small black and white screens to color TV, standard definition, high definition, full HD, and now we're looking at 4K screens. Screens are getting larger, they're getting higher resolution, and you might think, well, full HD is pretty good, isn't it? What can 4K really offer? But the fact is, market statistics are showing that we are still have such a desire to push the boundaries of immersion and experience that you can see here an incredible growth in the 4K TV sales worldwide. Now, what about the baby boomer generation? This survey, I think, was done at the end of 2014. And it asked baby boomers about the video viewing experience. And it asked them, how could we improve that experience for you? So this was a different generation to the millennials completely that was surveyed. The top three most responded as always or almost always are these ones here. We want a higher resolution video content. We want better sound and audio. And we want a larger screen size. Again, signs that we're trying desperately to get into these new experiences and these new worlds. Ultimately, what this is pointing to is that as a society, as a human race, we crave immersive experiences. An advertisement for a 4K TV. You know what the most disappointing part of that advertisement is? You know, it's wonderful, the fireworks going off, you have a couple sharing a moment. It's a beautiful, it feels immersive, especially on a big screen like this. But then all of a sudden, that experience, you zoom out, and it's shown that it's just a video clip on a TV screen in front of you. It's not quite an immersive experience, and that is the real kicker, for me at least. In steps virtual reality. Now, I know Timothy talked about the difference between VR and AR here, and I probably don't need to explain it. Is everyone happy with virtual reality and the differences between virtual reality and augmented reality? Oh, okay, no, there's a few who aren't. Okay, well, in that case, I'll give you a quick summary. Virtual reality is all about immersing you in different worlds, disconnecting you from this real life and taking you to another place or another time. Augmented reality is all about being in the real world and providing contextual information on top of that world, usually via bringing in virtual elements. Virtual reality is about immersion. Augmented reality is about information. There are a range of different headsets on the market. Let's get an idea of who's tried what. Who's tried something like the Google Cardboard? Okay. Who's tried the Samsung Gear VR? Who's tried the Oculus Rift? And finally, the HTC Vive. Okay. Who hasn't tried any virtual reality experience? Okay. Right. So, to give you a summary, there are a range of different headsets on the market, but they all serve a different purpose. They're not quite competing because they talk to different markets. On this side, the budget side, Google Cardboard, great for education. It's cheap, it's disposable, and it's easily distributed. And has low maintenance requirements. You just shove a smartphone in there and you're good to go. Samsung Gear VR offers a more premium experience in the mid-range level. Higher quality chassis, still portable. And then we get to the Oculus Rift and the HTC Vive, the higher end of the market. Now, this is generally where at least I see enterprise tends to play. The reason is, with these devices, you have far more immersive and different interaction capabilities. And I'll explain this a bit further here. So in virtual reality, we build a sense of immersion in multiple different ways. But ultimately, every virtual reality headset, at its core, allows you to look around different worlds, up, down, left, right. You move on to some of the more advanced ones, and they allow you to move physically in that virtual space. And then finally, you can also interact with a lot of them as well. Actually use your hands to open doors, to pick up objects, to say hi to people, and so on. Now, it's very difficult to try and give you an understanding, a true understanding of what it's like to be in high-end virtual reality, but that's about as close as I could get on a 2D screen. The interesting thing at the end, where a few people were laughing, where he sort of goes back because he's about to get hit by the whale's tail. It's funny, but that reaction is sort of the core reason that makes virtual reality such a strong medium in the first place. The fact that it can trick your brain into thinking that you are in some sort of danger or you're in some nervous or anxious situation. Has anyone tried walking a plank over a skyscraper, looking down at the streets below in virtual reality? This man here knows what I'm talking about. I can tell you, I've run that experience with many people in a completely safe environment, not in a stage with multiple layers, but just flat ground. And there is just an absolute horror in taking that step forward, even though logically there is no problem whatsoever. Virtual reality taps into that lizard brain in our head and convinces us that this world that we see in front of us is real. And we haven't had a medium that's been able to do that until now. Virtual reality is basically our most immersive storytelling medium that we've created as a human race so far. It allows us not only to be a spectator in an environment, but to actually be one of the participants, one of the protagonists in a story, to experience something firsthand as opposed to as a third party from behind a screen. It also allows us to go to places that we would otherwise be unable to go, whether that is because we have time constraints, whether that is because we have health constraints, or even whether because we have physical constraints, because we haven't invented a time machine yet. So, talked a lot about the consumer space and a lot about the abstract idea of storytelling and immersion. To satisfy the other side of the audience who are perhaps interested in the business side of things. What's going on in enterprise? Is it a relevant space for virtual reality to play in? We'll try to answer those questions now. Here are a few examples of how organizations around the world are using virtual reality right now. Not as a theory, not as an experiment, but actually doing it in operations. So, Walmart, the famous US supermarket chain, about, I think it was 3 months ago or so, announced that every one of their 200 US training academies are going to have virtual reality installed as part of the training package, as standard. Sotheby's, the famous auctioneer, they're using virtual, or their real estate arm is using virtual reality to try and give potential clients a vision, a real vision, an immersive vision of what it's like to be in these properties and to walk around them and actually experience it as if you were there without having to travel there. Lowe's, which is an American home improvement store, they're using virtual reality to allow customers to make changes to their rooms and to their houses to implement furniture and change the way it looks and then experience that in the virtual world. And a very interesting one, actually. In the UK, we've already used virtual reality in the courtroom. We've used it to try and give judge, jury, an idea of what it was like to be from the point of view of the witness, and also to create an immersive visualization that makes sense of, in this case, the accident scene. And Ford, not only using virtual reality to prototype vehicles, also using virtual reality to actually modify and optimize production line testing. So in other words, when a new vehicle comes out and workers are required to perform a certain action with a new part, they will perform that in virtual reality without having to close down any part of the production line. They will determine the ergonomics of the human being and whether that's the right thing to do or whether it can be done another way. Once those optimizations are made and tested outside the production line, it can then be brought in a final state without having to interrupt anything that's going on over there. So if we were to take, then there are many, many more examples, but if we were to take all of those examples and try and put them into a single enterprise model to try and make sense of it all, a framework, so to speak, it would look something like this. Enterprise VR has a lot of potential in training, particularly training when it comes to soft skills, things like public speaking, things like having hard conversations, as well as hands-on training. Engineering, let's say, where you have to actually get out a tool, you have to walk over there, open up a fuse box, play with some wires, cut things, and so on. Secondly, design. On the design side of things, this is basically saying that we no longer need to produce anything physical anymore when you can produce it virtually and it can have the same effect when you're viewing it. So imagine building something as complex as a sports car. That can be built in virtual reality or in 3D and brought into virtual reality. You can then have stakeholders all around the world that are involved in maybe the electronic side of things, that are involved in chassis design, that are involved in the ergonomics, the dashboard, the user experience. All of those individuals can come together in the same virtual space, not physically, virtually, understand what that's like, what changes need to be made, and those changes can be initiated immediately without having to go through reproduction of the actual physical vehicle itself. Data visualization, a fairly new area, and there's some discussion about whether this would be more useful in virtual reality and augmented reality. But I'm already talking to a company in the UK who have a paying client who's paying for them to provide data and for it to be analyzed in virtual reality. Now, we're in a world of big data. Data is becoming ever more complex, it's becoming massive in terms of its scale, and yet we still try to analyze it and to interpret it in a 2D screen in front of us. Now, what happens when you open up the real estate? All of a sudden, everything around us becomes an environment in which we can examine, interpret, and view data in a scalable fashion and in different ways. And that allows us to spot trends that we would otherwise be unable to do if we were simply looking at it on a small 2D screen. And finally, telepresence. The concept that I talked about previously of being able to be somewhere else in the world without having to physically travel there. That has a lot of potential in a lot of industries, but let's take construction, for example. Senior stakeholders in construction projects need to understand what the progress is like on site. Now, the most immersive and scalable way of doing that, without them having to travel as well, is by giving them a virtual reality live stream onto the different floors of the construction site or even from outside, allowing them to view a construction project here in Ukraine from the UK. Now, the large majority of tech companies, on top of all this, have invested a lot of time in virtual reality and augmented reality. And I'm sure we were all excited by Apple's announcements at their last conference recently. They are also invested in virtual reality. And we're going to start to see later iterations of the Mac have support for VR applications. So, what can we expect from the future? What is coming? I spoke to a few of you about this earlier. Has anyone seen this before? Gartner's hype cycle. A few of you, but not all. Allow me to explain. Can we get, no, you can't see that. It's okay, I'll do it from here. This is basically a theory of how emerging technologies progress on their life cycle. The x-axis is time. The y-axis is consumer expectations, right? So, according to the theory, everything starts off with an innovation trigger. The theory of the technology comes to light, and things like smart dust, 4D printing, are thought to have very significant or potential changes for humanity and in the world. Now, as time moves on, and the press and the media get hold of all these technologies, they start to push a lot of stories out. Everyone starts to get very excited and very pumped up about what's going on in the world. And you reach this second stage, the peak of inflated expectations. Now, of course, the technology at such an early stage can't meet those expectations. So what happens is you enter this third stage here, the trough of disillusionment, where consumer expectation just goes through the floor, tumbles tremendously into this trough of disillusionment, before eventually recovering in the slope of enlightenment and plateau of productivity. Now, this stage is interesting because that's when the technology is starting to see more and more use cases, enterprise is starting to become more and more comfortable with it, and it's seen as less of a risk to implement in organizations. Technologies that become an everyday part of our lives and become mainstream leave this cycle at that point. The interesting thing is here, two interesting things. Firstly, augmenting reality, about to have a really hard time, according to Gartner. virtual reality and augmenting reality ahead of every other single emerging technology, including blockchain, including drones, including artificial intelligence, in terms of maturity. And then finally, the reason this is colored light blue. Gartner expects there to be mainstream adoption of virtual reality technology in 2 to 5 years' time. Now it's just around the corner, basically. So, a little bit around the stats. I'm sure you've heard lots of stats before, so I won't go too overboard with this, but at the moment, the industry is estimated to be worth a few $1 billion. By 2021, that will grow exponentially to $75 billion. Secondly, there is a perception that virtual reality is just for gaming and entertainment purposes and doesn't really have a place in the business. And that, of course, is absolute rubbish. The expectation is that almost half of all revenue that comes from virtual reality will come from the enterprise. And finally, PwC recently did a report purely on the entertainment and media industry globally, and it looked at the next 5 years of where this is going. Virtual reality has the highest growth prospects out of every section in entertainment and media. We also predict over 250 million head-mounted displays will be in use by 2021. This is a prediction for virtual reality's exponential growth. As you can see here, worth a few billion, 7, climbing up to 75 by 2021. The important thing to note here is that it may not look much right now, if you look at the 7 number. But if you're thinking about delaying investments in virtual reality until it's up there or even up there, then you're going to have a bit of a hard time because you're going to be on the back foot. You won't be able to take advantage of all the knowledge, experience, the mistakes, all the learnings that you could have had by playing around and exploring the technology over there. So what else? What does the future look like? Immersive events is one of them. Attending concerts, live sports. At the moment, if we can't make it to the stadium or the tickets are too expensive, what's the next best thing? Anyone can shout it out. TV, exactly. But is that immersive enough? We're desperately trying to increase the size of our TVs in an effort to get into that world. There is a solution. You can imagine the idea of, at a concert or a sports event, a tennis match, we take a few of the front row seats out. Could take a few of the front row seats out here. We put a virtual reality recording device in there. That would allow, depending on the infrastructure, of course, an almost unlimited number of people to attend via virtual reality and actually experience that event not as a third person, not as a spectator, but as someone who actually has a seat in that venue. And that's quite powerful. It's powerful from a revenue generation perspective. It's powerful from a disruption perspective to the industries. Immersive meetings. Has anyone had a virtual reality meeting before? Oh, one person. Well done. So this is a picture of Facebook Spaces. It's a product which allows up to 4 people to meet in virtual reality, to bring in different environments, to interact, to collaborate with each other. I've had a few meetings in VR so far, and my observations are that this is an incredibly immersive way of having a meeting. And as far as comparisons to video conferencing is concerned, there is no comparison, really. I'll give you an example which is from my personal life. I once met a friend in Facebook Spaces, both of us with our Oculus Rifts in our different houses on different cities. And he pulled in a 360 video of his friend's wedding. And suddenly everything around us became his friend's wedding. And he looked at me and he said, Jeremy, look behind you. See that guy over there? And I turned around. And there was, a chap sitting there, he was wearing a beige suit, and he said to me, gave me stories and anecdotes about this person. And at the end of that, it was only a 15-minute conversation, but I felt a much deeper connection as a result. Immersive moments. So, at the moment, how do we capture moments in real life to enjoy them later on, to relive them? Videos and photos, exactly. But can we go even further than that? How do we relive those moments in a far more effective and immersive way? You know the answer already, but I'll tell you it again. It's via virtual reality. In the future, we'll be able to have moments in the past that we can relive through a VR headset or otherwise, that provide us a proper understanding of how that was like back in those days, that atmosphere all around you, creating a real sense of immersion there. Immersive art. Did you know that this is now becoming a recognized new art form in the world? The Royal Academy in London is actually running events specifically to allow artists that specialize in creating art in virtual reality to showcase all of their creations at these exhibitions. And immersive learning, of course. Schools are starting to adopt virtual reality to create more inspiration, more excitement about various classes. Think about history, for example. Being able to travel back in time to various points in the world's evolution and actually get a proper picture for what is going on. The amazing thing about immersive learning, I had a little bit of an experience, just an idea. Has anyone tried the Apollo 11 mission in virtual reality? Yeah, fantastic. One or two as well. So Apollo 11 allowed me to enter the actual craft itself. And I was sitting there, and I looked to my right, and there was Neil Armstrong and Buzz Aldrin on the seat next to me. I then looked to my left, outside the Apollo 11 craft, and I looked through the window. I could see the curvature of the Earth start to appear as this craft was leaving Earth's atmosphere. And it was quite an amazing experience. And it made me extremely jealous about the next generation of children, where this could very well be a key part of learning. So, to summarize, this is sort of your cheat sheet for the whole event or the whole talk. Storytelling is something we've always done. Ever since the beginning of humankind, when we first stepped foot on this planet, we've been telling stories in many different ways. It doesn't only apply to our personal lives, we tell stories in business as well. We tell stories in business to try and convince people, to try and give them information about new products, about new markets. We crave immersive experiences, whether it's through the different experiences we like to have nowadays, through cinema, through immersive theater, through supercar rides, through amusement parks. We're after trying out different things, and we want to experience that in an immersive way. We keep asking for bigger TVs. We keep asking for higher resolution gadgets. It's clear we want to enter these worlds. We want to be part of them. Virtual reality steps in very nicely there, because as a medium, it's the first one we've created as humankind that actually achieves this goal. It's a storytelling device, but it's one of the most immersive storytelling devices possible, which combines all of the elements that we spoke about before, the audio elements, the visual elements, the textual elements perhaps, the spoken elements. The industry is expected to grow strongly. You've seen the stats, you've seen the views from multiple different providers, PwC, Greenlight Insights, and the number of tech companies that are actually involved and invested in this space. And the wonderful thing is, the best is yet to come. For anyone that's experienced virtual reality, that is the worst it will ever be. It will only improve from here on out, and we will continue to create more and more immersive experiences. And I'm fairly certain that a lot of you will join us on that journey to creating and developing these new worlds. So it's something I'm very excited about, and hopefully you are too. Thank you, everyone, for listening.
Thank you, Jeremy. Okay, so we don't have too much time, but couple questions. Whoever first, please raise your hand.
Good evening.
Hello.
I want to ask you how augmented reality will be changed by AR Kit and AR Core, and should we wait VR Kit in the nearest future?
Your last bit, should we wait for a VR kit in the future? Okay. AR Core and AR Kit represent an important milestone on the pathway of augmented reality to mainstream societal adoption. And the reason for that is you look at the market. Who has Android phones and Apple phones? Now, at the moment, there's only a small segment that will support AR Core and AR Kit. But as the technology progresses and as more and more phones get on board and start to get supported by these two technologies, then all of a sudden, 90% of the market or more has the technology in their pocket by default. Whether you're interested in augmented reality or virtual reality, you buy a phone, it has augmented reality on it. That's an important point, because suddenly, when the technology becomes default, that's when it starts to integrate itself into society. That's when the business cases start to become easier to develop. When the market shows that we have so much of a population that we can hit by developing AR Kit or AR Core applications, then it becomes easy to sign that off and get budget for it, for example. So those two represent an important part of the journey. VR Kit, whenever it comes, I would say it's a different ballgame. A lot of people like to bunch VR and AR together, and to some extent they are sister technologies, but ultimately they have different use cases with only small intersection in the middle of them. So, in my opinion, the development should be running in parallel for VR initiatives and AR initiatives.